Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Radical Respect podcast. I'm Kim Scott.
And I'm Wesley Faulkner, her co-host. And today we have a special guest, Henna. Henna, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, happy to. My name is Henna Pryor. I am a workplace performance expert, and I speak and write about interpersonal dynamics, social fitness, and mindset in the workplace. And very happy to be here with the both of you.
Love it. Excited to hear more about your work. And I know there's a lot of intersection between what you do and the stuff that Wesley and I talk about.
Yes, a ton. I devoured, Kim, both of your books, but especially the recent one, because right now I just think we all need to be talking about the way we interact with each other and how
Yeah.
things work and how things very much don't. And so I'm
Yeah.
excited to play with this with you.
Yes, it does not seem like we're at peak respect in the world's culture right now.
Understatement of the year.
Yes.
Very
Yeah,
off-peak
exactly.
season right now
Yeah.
of respect. I agree. Also, I'm first generation American, and so I feel that the way that the awkwardness of the cultural way that I grew up and the way that I see the world and the differences have a stark contrast. And so your work also really resonates with me and my experience as well.
Yeah, I think many of us, whether we're first born to the United States or not, I am first generation in the US, but many of us grew up with a generation that was very different. And so I think when we think about your work, Kim, and the way we struggle to redefine our communication, I think there's so much that's contributing. We obviously had the pandemic, which gave people a lot of struggle in the way we
Yeah.
interact. But then I think this has been building for years with the technology, the way we use it. I am deeply fearful for my children's generation. I've got a 14 and 12-year-old, and I'm curious. Again, I would love to talk about how this intersects with your work. But Vivek Murthy, about a month ago, did a study in the UK, and he found that. So Vivek Murthy, the U.S. Surgeon General, in case anyone is not familiar with him, he found that teenagers over there are struggling to talk offline because they're so used to talking online. So if they're
Yeah.
struggling to have any conversation
Yeah.
offline, forget about toxic conversation or difficult conversation, any conversation, then what does it mean when conversation becomes difficult or there's
Yes.
prejudice or
Yeah.
bias? Lord help us all. This is where we're headed,
Yeah.
right? And so I think we need to get ahead of it.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I have twins who are 15. Wesley, how old are your kids again?
9 and 11, so we're before there. But I was going
Yeah.
to say that it's really, really, really hard to do emoji in person.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll
Would be
try.
the heart they do try. So I think one of the things that I found about radical candor, the first book I wrote, was, and this was when my kids were much younger, I had built this app that was supposed to help people have these more radically candid conversations at work. And I was watching my kids perform. They were singing Believe It or Not, It's Just Me on stage and some summer theater program. And I was filming them on my phone. And I was looking at them kind of on the phone. And then I glanced up from my phone and looked at the actual kids on stage. And my eyes filled with tears. And I was like, oh my God, like it's such a different experience to actually not be looking at the phone, but be looking at the actual kids. And I had this moment of clarity that caused me to shut the company down, the company that was trying to build these radical candor apps. Because I realized the whole point of my work is to remind people to put their phones away and have real human conversations.
Yeah.
And that the app was a value subtracting round trip. The phone actually can be an enhancer because we all misinterpret each other's facial expressions and body language. So sometimes a phone call, can actually be a better way to have these conversations
Yeah.
than a video call, and maybe even than an in-person conversation. That's more debatable. But the data is pretty clear that for a video call, there's more noise than signal and facial expressions and body
Yeah,
language.
I agree with you. I recently read a quote, and I apologize to whoever this should be attributed to because I've tried to find it, but it was something like, when we see the world through a small screen, we struggle to see the larger picture.
Yes. Yeah.
And I thought that was so poignant for the moment in
Yeah.
time that we live in. We miss things. It doesn't matter if you have a giant monitor. We
Yeah.
still miss things that happen in those little, breath changes or those little nuances. And I think that cost is big, and we're struggling to push against that.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, it's interesting, even the little breath change of the facial, we may misinterpret that.
Mhm.
Even when we're in fact, I recommend if you're having a conversation that's, beyond that may be a little difficult or awkward, to take a walk with
Mhm.
someone rather than sitting across the table and looking at them. Because, like, if I tear up, you may think it's because 'cause I'm sad, but it's because 'cause I'm fucking furious. Excuse my
Right. These are
uh,
rage tears.
yeah,
Let's be
yeah, there's a
clear.
rage.
Yeah.
And I think we all I mean, Wesley, you and I have talked about this. Like, often, you may be experiencing one emotion and somebody else looking at you may misinterpret that emotion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have thinking face.
Yeah.
People think I'm pissed off when I think for some reason. I should say for some reason I give off like when I'm thinking. I'm like, and people are like, is
I,
something wrong? I'm like, no, I'm just
Wesley, I love it. I love that you just said that because I was immediately thinking as Kim was talking rage tears. We all have similar age children, within a few years of one another. And, there's all the research that says for teenagers, the frontal part of their brain that can accurately analyze facial expression isn't fully developed. So sometimes when my daughter's talking to me, she's 14, and I'm deeply concentrating on what she's saying, I guess I furrow my brow. So,
Yeah.
Wesley, I share this with you. I have thinking face. And she will literally say, Mom, why are you mad at me?
Yeah.
Why are
Yeah.
you mad at me? And clearly this is my focus face, Layla. I'm not mad at you. But I read something that said that expressions on Zoom amongst adults, especially amongst adults who are dealing with uncertainty, challenge, change, disruption. Hello, all of us.
Yeah.
We have the same capabilities in our brain. We misinterpret even the smallest brow furrow. We
Yes.
misinterpret every signal. And that's hard. That's hard when we're already uncertain. We already don't know how it's being received. And now we're fighting that on top of all of it.
Yeah.
and
And
it's
that's why
edited.
the
Like it's
phone call
yeah.
may be
Yeah.
such
Well, sorry to interrupt.
Go
Yes, a
ahead.
phone call. You were saying. I was saying Zoom also has like a beautify filters, and there's like AI that moves your eyes and what you're looking at. So
Mm,
you're edited, and there's filters when you're doing these video calls as well that you're not
yeah.
even judging the right thing because the person may or may not be doing it.
My brow furrow was smoothed.
Yes.
Yes.
So
Yes.
this is what, but all of that, despite the problems of Zoom, are better than texting.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
better and this is what I try to convince my kids, like, pick up the phone and call someone.
Mhm.
Don't send them a text because you can't possibly gauge how the other person is responding to you in some sort of asynchronous communication feels faster and it feels safer. And it is neither one of those two things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
Key and Peele skit that talks about texting and how
Uh-huh.
one is interpreting it way differently than the other. It's hilarious.
Oh, send it to me. I want to
I
see
I
it.
will.
was gonna say, I don't think I've seen that one. What I love about your book titles, Kim, specifically, is just the word radical. Like,
Yes.
this isn't about a small incremental shift. So, just on an anecdotal, personal level, our kids currently, as of this recording, are at sleepaway camp.
Oh,
They
wow.
return on Saturday.
Mhm.
I will own fully, and I don't consider myself a judgmental person, but I used to think that parents who did sleepaway camp were people who needed breaks from their children, and that's why they did it. I did not need a break from our children, neither did my husband. That was not our impetus. It was actually, the term I like to use is it's a decline of social fitness in life and in
Yeah.
the workplace. And this camp is no devices. They are
Yes.
being, in bunks with kids they don't know. They've never done this camp before. They are outside all day having to problem solve, doing sports they've never done, having to have conversations they've never had. And that to me felt like, all the discomfort that's coming with this being a new experience is worth it because that muscle is increasingly underutilized. It's
Yes.
weakening by the day, and something radical needed to happen. In our case, sleepaway camp. That was
I
our
love it.
solution.
I love it. Here's a business idea. Because I was looking for this very reason. I wanted to have a family vacation at a place that didn't allow devices and had no Wi-Fi. And like, that's a good resort. I would go to that resort. I
People
would
would
go
go.
yeah, would go to that hotel. In fact, what I did was now I'm taking them camping. I got a very comfortable air mattress. Uh,
That's funny.
so and in fact, I went camping recently with my son, and just for a night, not too far away from our house, and there was nothing to, and we had such a good long conversation because
Mm-hmm.
so reminding people and for me, one of the great pleasures in life, and also one of the great, ability to get stuff done is conversation.
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing you say is that we're maybe losing the art of conversation.
Yeah, the art of conversation, the art of reading people. So, one of my favorite studies that I cite early in my book is about this idea that our social muscles can atrophy. And we knew this before the pandemic. We knew this before technology. There were certain professions like astronauts or polar explorers, folks that were by nature very isolated in their role. They would come back from their expedition or from their experience and forget how to people, for lack of a
Yeah.
better term, right? They couldn't read people's facial expressions. What does this mean? What is this expression on your face? Those cues, those gestures, they fell out of practice. And we know that that research is true because remember that first meeting you had in person after the pandemic? We're like,
It was tiring.
right. It was exhausting. We're like, are we fist bumping? Are we standing close? We're all doing this little dance. And we all forgot how to do it too, because social muscles, just like any other muscles, conversational muscles, physical muscles, can atrophy. And the fear is if we can't get good at the small stuff, how do we have a conversation about prejudice,
Yeah.
about bullying when we're avoiding the mundane anymore?
Yeah. 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 I think that is so, so important. And it was funny. I was talking to a woman who's a senior leader at a big tech company. And she said, since the pandemic, people have forgotten how to be respectful of each other in a meeting. She said, we'll be in meeting
Mm-hmm.
and a person will be like mid-sentence and somebody will get up right at that moment and go to the bathroom, like
Mm-hmm.
or walk right. I was talking to a business school professor, and they said that students will, like, when I was in business school, I never would have gotten up to leave during
Right.
like I went to the bathroom before class started because you didn't get up to interrupt it. And people will get up, not only will they get up and go to the bathroom, and sometimes things happen, but they'll walk like right in between the professor and the class as the like and I am definitely not like an etiquette person.
Sure.
But I do think I am about caring about other people and paying attention to the impact that we have on other people. And that is a muscle that we need to understand. Sometimes we don't understand. Like, I always thought that I was
Yeah.
really good at reading other people, but I've learned recently that, like a lot of us, I actually misinterpret people's
Mm-hmm.
facial expressions. And I've had
Yeah.
to learn how to ask. I'm like, I can't tell what you're thinking. Will you tell me?
Right.
Instead of
Right.
assuming that I have this great people skill. Because I think
Right.
a lot of us think we have great people skills, but we don't.
Right. And I think this is part of, the awkwardness of these conversations is I think when we're early career and we can't read someone, the stakes are still there, but they feel less high. And what I've
Mhm.
observed in some of my, clients and their work is the leaders who have the most to lose, they feel like they should be able to misinterpret or be able to properly interpret rather someone's facial
Yeah.
expression. They should know how their team feels about this based on their body language. And to your point, they're actually not as good at it as they think. But to
Yes.
be able to admit that out loud for people who have, theoretically worked with these teams for some number of years, they should know, they should themselves to death. And then all of a sudden, we've got things rolling in the wrong direction and turning into bigger issues that could have been smaller issues. So it's, I think, the humility to embrace the awkwardness
Yes.
of you're making a face and I think it means this, but I'm not quite sure. Can we talk about it? Right? Just
Yes.
bring that
Yes.
into the
Or I'm just
room.
thinking. Yeah.
Yes. That's
Yes.
Wesley's thinking face, everyone. Don't
I
misinterpret.
have the issue where I asked too much. Like, some people
Mm,
take my questions as accusations. Like,
mm,
from all of the choices, is this the cheapest one? makes me sound like I'm saying this is very expensive when I'm just asking, is this the cheapest one?
Mhm.
And there's a lot of interpretation where questioning sounds like accusations or assertions. And
Mhm.
that's the thing that I struggle with because of, I think, the social norm of it being structured that you don't ask questions, that you just accept
Mhm.
things. And I'm a very active participant in conversations. I like to be able to understand and to diagnose and to really understand where in space and even where in the structure in the system the conversation is whatever we're talking about, an idea, we're talking about a postmortem, we're talking about a new product. I really am the person to ask questions. And then I often, after these meetings, get these side questions or side announcements saying, I'm glad you asked, or I'm
Mm.
glad that you brought that up, because it is that social norm of just accepting and being passive, and I'm extremely active. Now, do
Yeah.
you see that as well, like
Mhm.
that the extremes on the other end where people are just maybe too active?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I actually had a wonderful. I recently interviewed Todd Kashdan. I don't know if you are friendly with him. He's a psychologist and he writes a lot about dissent in the workplace. So slightly different angle, but I loved a lot of what he said around we've become so hyper focused on peacekeeping and not offending that we actually have almost lost the art of healthy challenging and healthy dissent in the workplace. In your case, you're not trying to piss anyone off. You're not even trying to dissent. In fact, that's a clarifying question at best, right? Is this the cheapest option? But I think people have become so worried that they're going to ruffle a feather and they don't know what to do with it once they ruffle a feather that they either don't, or one person, in this case, maybe you, Wesley, is the one who's doing the majority of that heavy lifting, while the others just hope that someone else does. I personally find that right now, and I don't know that this is a long term solution. Kim, I'm actually very curious your take on this. For me, right now, to me, it seems like we are needing to be in the season of over communication on our tone and our intent. So in that case, it could be, hey, was this the cheapest option? Not a leading question, not saying that that's what I think it should be, but I'm genuinely curious if it is, right? Does it feel like overkill? It kind of does, yes. But I also think there's so much ambiguity right now and people not understanding what they're being asked that I would rather people over communicate what they mean by what they say, at least for now, until we recalibrate on a better way to do it. But Kim, I'm curious your perspective on sort of over communicating in this season of disruption right now.
Yeah, I think two thoughts are popping into my head at the same
Yeah.
time. So one is I'm wondering, Wesley, if that's bias that people would interpret your question as aggressive. Is that
Mm,
like if I asked the same question, would it land the same way for people?
mhm.
I don't know. What do you think?
I think we should switch bodies and try it.
It's an excellent. Let's try it. Maybe I think AI will allow us to do
Yeah.
that, right? So, um,
Yes.
so that the other thing that I was thinking what I would say, uh,
Mm,
and one of the things that I found in the course of my career was that as I became, one of the older, more senior people in the course of my career, that my questions did kind of carry that weight.
mm,
And so here's what I would do if I were worried that somebody would interpret my question as skepticism is I would say, wow, that seems like a really good deal. What was the next most expensive? So I would I would
mhm.
I would or at the and then that would give them the opening to talk about, and was there a cheaper option and why did you choose this one? So that's one, and that's me maybe being very aware that and maybe some might say too aware, but aware that sometimes if if I'm the most senior person in the room, that my words can seem intimidating to people. So I don't know, what do you think? What do y'all think about that?
I always think that there's this weird tension we're navigating where leaders benefit from being more rigorous about word choice and being more intentional with how they communicate, but are afraid it becomes coddling.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's not coddling. It's about
Yeah.
being aware that power corrupts. And so you want to
Right.
lay your power down.
Agree. I agree. And I think word choice, the great news about that is, just a turn of phrase. You just said it a little differently, can solve all of the, downhill collection of what just by a slight tweak of words. It's a shift worth making, right? If you can avoid all of the misinterpretation, if you can avoid all of the ambiguity, it shouldn't be as hard as it is for a lot of people. But I think, again, conditioning is hard to break when people are used to being direct or used to being succinct, to say, hey, can you add a little bit of this color on top? Simple, not easy. People hear it and they say, okay, I can see the value in that, but changing that behavior it's the ongoing challenge.
Yeah. What do you
Now I want to
think?
think about how I would say it. Wesley, how would you say it differently if it was you?
100%. I would probably just say, hey, I'm really trying to make this make sense from a value perspective. And I'm trying to think of the general solutions we used in the past. And I'm just trying to understand and educate myself on this specific, where this fits in the whole thing. Is this the cheapest option, or what are the other options? Not to say that that has a higher value or low value. It's just, I'm just trying to educate myself in this area.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. I like that better than the other one. They were both effective, but I could see how that version has less potential misinterpretation attached.
Yeah.
And then I asked the question, and they're like, oh, we're out of time.
Yeah.
But the word count is significantly higher on that version, right? So I think we're constantly efficiency, speed, and that takes longer.
Yeah.
But
it does. But if you factor in the phone call after the meeting where you have to reassure someone that you have respect for them, a stitch in time saves 9, and especially if you've gotten feedback often, that it tends to, so saying, I admire this analysis. This is awesome. This is awesome analysis. Can you give me a little more details on what are some of the options you rejected, or something like that.
Right. All takes practice.
Yeah. Yeah. And it takes willingness. I mean, it does take, I also want to acknowledge it is hard. It does take energy. Like, you have to get out of your head and try to understand the impact that your words are having on someone else. And that does take energy, but if you're not going to expend that energy, you're not going to communicate very well. There was one time when I think I told this story before, but I'm going to tell it again because I love it. I was working with this engineer, and we were trying to figure out when a meeting was going to happen. And there was one time that worked for everyone except him. And he said, well, that's when I run, and my run is more important to me than this meeting.
Oh dear. Oh no.
Very honest, and also obnoxious, but he did not, in his mind, and I knew him well enough to know this, he was just trying to express what his priorities were,
Sure.
And so I talked to him later about it, and I was trying to say to him, like, I'm not trying to prevent you from taking your run. Like, first of all, your run is important to me too. But the way you said that was predictably going to piss everybody in the room off.
Right.
And he didn't understand why, because he was just all about the rational side of things. And I said, when we communicate on an emotional plane and on a rational plane at the same time. And if you disregard all the emotional signals in the room as irrelevant, you are just not going to communicate very well.
Yeah.
Yes, it's harder to factor 2 things into account rather than 1. But if you're only optimizing for one thing, you're going to get the wrong answer. So let's try to get the right answer. And he was like, oh, that made sense. Like, I had to boil it down to him, like multi-factor.
Yeah, I love that story. That's such a powerful story. And I think this is, Kim, what I love about, I know you talk about this a lot in your book, is just a few different choices of words make such an impact. So I love your, I, you, it, just a little bit of a difference in words, and it lands completely differently. And while I think people can generally agree on the value of that, especially now, especially with just the rapid change and the constant disruption, we really can't afford to get the word choice wrong. We're already hanging on by a thread. So I feel like this is just more
Yes.
important than
Yeah.
ever.
Yes, we can't afford to, and we're gonna inevitably get it wrong. So,
Yes,
and
correct.
those 2
Correct.
things, and so if you let the fact that you're inevitably gonna say the wrong thing prevent you from saying anything, that's the worst of all worlds.
Correct. Agree.
And so I think a big part of this is making sure that we're if we're correcting someone's word choice, for example, we're doing it respectfully.
Correct.
It is not, it's not disrespectful to correct someone's word choice. The
Mm-hmm.
silence feels more respectful, but is actually disrespectful.
Can I share a really quick story? This actually happened yesterday. I was at a speaker conference, and there was I was talking with a friend. I won't name her, but we were chatting about something. Another speaker who we both kind of knew was there, and she goes, "Hey, Tara. Hey, Tara. Hey." Tara walks away, doesn't say anything, and I look at my friend, and I really thought about how I wanted to say this. I said, "Hey, I know you're someone who cares about the way names are pronounced. She goes by Tara."
Yeah.
And she looked at me and she goes, "Thank you so much. I am someone who cares about that." Right.
Yes.
And I just thought, okay, what I say right now matters a lot about how that is received. It's
Yeah.
Tara. Then she would have felt bad and felt guilty because she's,
Yeah.
human. It's just little turns of phrase. But I do think they require practice. I don't think I said that as easily or as naturally or as quickly in years past. It's taken practice to sort of develop the rhythm of that type of language on a quick,
Yeah.
consistent basis.
Yeah. And then sometimes we have relationships with people where we can go the absolute opposite direction and it works. Like I
Mhm,
was
mhm.
correcting, there was a guy I work with and he kept confusing Slovakia and Slovenia. And we had the
Oh,
kind of relationship where the best way, I corrected him once, I corrected him, he kept making the mistake. And I finally said, "It's Slovakia, not Slovenia, dumbass." And
right.
he thought that was hilarious. And that was
Right.
okay. Like, it's an end-to-end problem. And
Yes.
it's about understanding the other person. So
Agree, agree.
Wesley, I may be misinterpreting it, but it looked like you had a thought
Well, so
before that.
We were looking at your
well,
brow, Wesley.
the thought I was thinking of when I looked clearly angry was that that sometimes I don't know if the correcting is the right word, but because you're raising awareness about something that isn't aligned with what that person wants.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So whether or not it's the pronunciation of a name or understanding how words impact others, it's allowing them the freedom to act in the way that they think that they want, that is true to them, and it's in their best interest as well. So
Yeah.
it feels correcting when the other person is actually not aligned to that same outcome. So
Uh,
using the wrong pronoun or something like that, that is when I feel that it feels like the word correcting is in the punitive sense, like you did something
mhm.
wrong, where there's shame attached to it, or there's anger or some sort of retaliation. But if you ever talk to me and make me aware of something that I can do better, I don't know if I feel as that's correcting. That's you helping. So I feel as more helpful.
I
Yeah.
love
So
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
What immediately comes up for me, as it relates to my work is this emotion of awkwardness exists in uncertainty. So if this is Kim and her, I don't know the person's name, the Slovakia Slovenia person, there is enough understanding of this will be received X way because we've
Yeah.
built this up, right? And if I don't know you as well, and I'm like, it's Slovakia, dumbass, right? And we
Yeah.
don't
That's not
know,
the way to do. Yeah.
right? And that's where that potential for awkwardness kicks up. So I remember an interesting story. Leanne Davey and I were talking about stories for the book, and she said there was a situation where she was walking down the hall, and her skirt after the bathroom was still kind of tucked up, where
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
not laying correctly. Let's say that. And she
Tucked
said,
into her underwear in the
right,
bathroom.
correct. You wouldn't believe how many people walked by her and didn't say anything. She's the one with the skirt tucked
Yeah.
into her underwear, but
Yeah.
they couldn't stand the awkwardness of having to be the one to say it.
Yeah, yeah, and we all know that the kind thing to do is to tell her
Right.
rather than to let her walk around the rest of the day with her butt hanging out, right?
Right, right. But in
Nobody
this moment, the logic is out the window. It's this,
Yeah,
reptilian brain that is just going, I don't know how she'll respond to this. I don't know if I'm going to make her feel embarrassed. And then I may have to take on that vicarious embarrassment because now I'm in it with her.
yeah,
There's all this
yeah,
like, cauldron of emotions, and getting people comfortable at staying in those for a little bit longer is a prerequisite to conversations about bias, prejudice, pronouns, but we
yes,
can't even do it for the basic, obvious stuff. I become
yeah,
fearful for the rest
yeah,
of it.
yeah.
There, there's
Go
a
ahead.
just quickly, there was a commercial where they had with this awkward moment, and someone leans in and says, "It's pronounced Dumas."
Oh yeah, the
Do
Snickers
you remember that
commercial.
commercial?
Yeah,
Yes.
Snickers.
And so I had to throw that in there. Kim, go. What you were
I
saying?
love it. Yeah, and it's I mean, what I was gonna say is it's funny to think about where our line is. Like
Hmm.
for, if somebody has spinach in their teeth, I think most people would say,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
pretty, your fly down, that's a little harder, but there's something about the skirt in in the back.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
I think also because it's something that is less like it's more likely to happen to a woman than a man, so gender creeps in, so that's much harder for people, and they're afraid, like, somebody has a booger, like like,
Right.
where is the line where you're not gonna where it's too you feel it's too awkward, where your feelings of awkwardness overwhelm your desire to help that other person. And
Yeah.
I
There's.
think I think the further out we can move that line, so
Mhm.
the less we're focused on our own feelings of awkwardness and the more we're focused on helping the other person, the better.
Right. There's a phrase that's quite simple that has shaken out to be very helpful in this, which is something along the lines of, "I would want someone to tell me."
Yes.
So just
Yes.
as you say, "Hey, your skirt is a little bit," and I would want someone to tell me. It
Yes.
actually depersonalizes it and actually diffuses some of the tension because it almost seems like this, you know, shared communal moment. And
Yes.
it's interesting how just that one phrase can take some of the sting out of whatever discomfort, social discomfort comes out of it.
Yeah. I'll never forget. This is another example of the same thing. When my mother was telling me about a moment when she was in high school,
Mhm.
and unbeknownst to her, she had a malfunction of her feminine hygiene, and there was blood on her. There was blood
Oh,
on her sock. And she said this boy in her class came up to her and said, "If you were my sister, I would want I would want someone to tell you." And he told her, and like it's so funny because this was 50 years ago for her, and she burst into tears. you know, like
mm,
it's so important and so rare,
yeah. I think this is,
so rare.
it goes to the heart of your through line and mine, which is this return to humanity. I can't tell you how many. I was just at a speaker conference. I watched at least 8 keynoters, and I think everyone had some underlying theme of, in the age of technology, we need to double down on human connection.
Yeah,
I think
and we
that
need
that
to
was
be kind. Yeah,
yeah,
we need to
that was
focus
everyone's.
on what's kind to the other person, not
Yes,
what makes us most comfortable, but what makes the other person, what's in service of the other
right.
person.
In the US especially, because I feel other
Yes.
countries do this better.
Yes.
And compassion is something that I think we all would love, but it feels as if it's like common sense. If it
Mhm.
was common, we wouldn't have a word for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Compassion is something that we all value, but it is still not in an abundance that we think that we should be. If knowing that we all really, really want it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think reminding each other of it. I mean, it's interesting.
Mhm.
I was recently on vacation in Florida, and there were several restaurants I went into that had huge signs, "Be kind to one another." I was like,
Mhm.
we're in this moment where we need to write that on the
To
wall.
remind
You know?
ourselves. Right.
Yes. to be
Right.
kind to one another. And so that's Hannah, what I love about your work is that's what you're at the core. I think that's what you're
Yeah.
reminding people to do.
Yeah. I think in a way, what's been really delightful about studying, an unexplored emotion like awkwardness, at least at the depth that I did, is that no one is immune. No one is immune. Even the
Yeah.
most confident communicators don't get to avoid it. I think that's the biggest misconception. Some folks seem masterful in their communication. They're masterful in their ability to handle even the most complicated conflict, including prejudice, including discrimination, harassment, bullying. These people just seem to have it. And yet, they too are not immune from the emotion of awkwardness,
Yeah.
because this is, unless somebody's got the crystal ball, that this is exactly how this conversation is going to go. This is exactly how this person's going to react. Then that emotion is going to bubble up for every single one of us. The opportunity then becomes, from my vantage point, is how do we learn to run towards it? I don't want to use the cliche
Yeah.
of the bison and the storm and the ones that people use all the time, but how do we start to embrace it and actually start to befriend it rather than
Yeah.
tolerate it or
Yeah.
avoid it? And usually with awkwardness, we talk about getting over it, avoiding it. My stance
Yeah.
is ain't gonna
Go through it.
happen.
Yeah.
Not in
Yeah.
this
The only way
lifetime.
out is through.
So we may as well get
And
darn good at it.
I think that's an amazing and awesome transition into where we tell a story about your own personal journey with bias, prejudice, and bullying. Do you happen to have a time that you can remember where you had to deal with that type of struggle, either in a work environment or other that you would be willing to share?
Yeah, I'm going to paint an interesting contrast. Growing up was riddled with what I would call traditional discrimination. I would say harassment in many places. I am firstborn of immigrant parents. My parents are from India and Pakistan. I dressed kind of funny. I had keema paratha in my lunch when everybody had peanut butter and jelly, and so my lunch smelled very fragrant in the cafeteria, not in a good way, according to fourth grade Henna. Everybody is like, "What's that stinky stuff in your lunchbox?" I remember constantly, where's your magic carpet? Do you have sand
Oh,
in your
God.
backpack? I got all kinds of crap. So the typical bullying, prejudice stuff growing up.
Mhm.
I outgrew a lot of that. And I don't know if it was just a combination of me, frankly, assimilating. I stopped dressing so differently. I stopped packing food that was so different. So I think there was a part of me, I think most first generation immigrant kids will know the story of, I didn't want my name to be Henna. Just give me Jennifer, give me Jessica, give me one of those nice 80s names. That's what I want to be. But, I stuck with Henna, and I assimilated well enough. As I got into my professional life, something interesting happened. I found my first, feelings of confidence in college, started to find my style, my people. But now, and this is really, it feels very fresh for me because it's actually, again, I won't name names, but coming off of a 5-day speaker conference, this feels very present for me again. I am very grateful. I'm going to brag. I don't believe in humble bragging. I'm just going to brag. I've had a
Right.
very good 2 years. I'm very grateful. My speaking career has taken off. My book has done well. I have an ink column. All of these things have happened to me through a lot of hard work and perseverance. And more than one person at this speaker conference made a comment about, well, of course, because you're a girl and a woman of color.
Oh, God.
And I'm thinking, I have worked my butt off these last 2 years. And I'm not naive to the fact that I am a woman of color. But, one form of microaggression or bias is this ascription of intelligence or ascription of a certain culture or color having advantages. So as a South Asian woman, I got a lot of you must be good at math. You must be good at science. Your uncle must have a
Yeah.
7-Eleven. Here's the irony. My uncle did have a 7-Eleven. But, there was a lot of that growing up. And so I think where it feels really painful is it almost feels as though, oh, you got into these rooms and these spaces and these stages because you are a woman of color, not because you have busted your hump and done all the work and then some to try to earn your seat. And so that hurts. It almost hurts more than there's sand in your backpack as an adult.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's awful. I mean, because it's not only did you work hard, you did great work. You wrote a great book, and that is
Yeah.
That's why you're there, not because, you're a great speaker. That's why you're there, not
Yeah.
not because of any of these other reasons. And I feel like we're at this moment where people feel free to say things like that.
Yeah.
And, you know, I th- I think that we need to challenge in very serious ways when people, and you shouldn't have to challenge. I hope that
Right.
someone standing near you
Mm.
challenged those kinds
Yeah.
of
Not
statements.
really. I think I am
Yeah,
the one who
yeah,
challenged. But I think this goes back to what we were talking about before, which is there's a way to do that with love, right? I mean, this is all the thesis of your first book, which is I know what you mean by that, and that maybe there are some different doors given the moment in time that we live in. But I also want to make sure we don't exclude the rest of the conversation, which is all the effort, all the work, all the sacrifice, all the late nights, and I think when it's delivered that way, it's at least
mhm.
received, and the awareness, to Wesley's earlier language, the awareness is created. I don't know that I've totally changed their mind that is a lot of what contributed to XYZ. I think maybe there's some folks that are always going to believe, well, I'm a white male, you're a woman of color. Even if I perceive us to be equally talented, you will win. I can't change their mind on that. But what I can try to do is make the awareness, much more surface level where I can. And if that's all I can do in this moment to try to move the conversation forward, then I'll do it on behalf of me and everyone else who gets put into
Yeah,
that category.
yeah, yeah. I think that, so it sounds like it was sort of an I statement that you used. I know
Yes.
what you mean,
Yes.
and what you may not be aware of is that I feel like you're undercutting the value of my work by saying that, and I think my work
Mhm.
has value. You
Yeah. I
know?
think I said something very similar to that, actually.
Yeah,
Pretty just about right.
yeah, yeah. And what was the
Can I
response?
It was well received, very well received. And
Good.
here's the painful part about anything as it relates to prejudice, microaggressions, bias, and Wesley, I'm curious if you agree here. If I don't deem you capable of changing your awareness, I don't bother.
Yeah,
So I actually try to say to someone, I'm saying this to you as a compliment because I believe that you're a good person and you don't mean what you're
yeah,
saying without the
you didn't
context.
yeah,
Right. And I physically try to add that statement. Hey, I'm about to say something to you because I believe you're a good person and I really care about you.
yeah,
Here's what I'm thinking right now. Because I started with a statement of that nature, it was received quite well. And he was like, "Oh, I didn't mean to say that you don't work hard. I know how hard you work." And I said, "Okay, all right, we're at least on the same page. I think some awareness happened, and hopefully he'll be more thoughtful about saying something like that the next time."
What do you think, Wesley?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think the being dealing with graciousness and being able to correct someone like that. Um, but I also wanted to like highlight one thing that's kind of, and this is a controversial statement and may offend some people, but I'm going to say it anyway. Um, I think inherently people don't see differences as a skill or has value.
Mm,
Coming from a different background, coming from a different culture, coming from a different race or religion does give you a different perspective that I think it allows you to see things from different angles. And some people don't see that in itself as a skill or something that has value. And so they can say, well, of course, because of this, because that's diminishing of the difference, instead of
mhm.
highlighting the difference of saying, oh, well, I mean, you're different than some of the people who speak about this topic. So of course you're going to have a different perspective that's going to
Yep.
land different, that's going to resonate with different people, that's going to reach a broader audience. And I don't think that person meant it that way, but I think
Right.
that if they did mean it that way, it would not have had that same type of blow.
Mhm.
And right now, especially with on the Democratic side, who's running for president,
Mhm.
I've there's an uptick of the phrase like DEI hire as a slur. Um,
Mhm.
Someone being a woman, meaning that they're less qualified inherently,
Right.
without actually doing the the comparison on the on the flip side, for instance, the vice presidential choice for on the Republican side, no one's saying that he doesn't have a lot of experience in politics. No one is saying that he doesn't have a lot of experience in writing great policy, but those things are also true. Yes,
Yeah.
he does have a military record,
Right.
but there are things that if you do a fair comparison between the roster and the resume of one party and the roster and the resume of someone else, just because he looks a certain way, those questions don't come up. And the same with Laura Trump. I think she is the RNC chair. She's related to someone who used to be president. Does that make her qualified? Is someone calling her a DEI hire?
Right.
It's just that it's only weaponized on against some people. But if the implication is like DEI stands for didn't earn it, we really need to understand.
I've never heard that either. Oh, where's my pen?
Terrible. No, don't write it down.
No, I know. That's awful.
I think there needs to be an interrogation of who earned what and how.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think that's offensive or controversial.
No,
I
don't either.
Yeah. I think the other thing that I have found since I've been out and about doing radical respect talks, I've had people come up and say things to me like there was a guy got a promotion at a company and a white man, and somebody came up to him and said, "It's not fair that you got this because you're a white man." And he was asking me like, how should I respond to that? And I said, look, ask this person, do they think that your accomplishments mean you didn't deserve your promotion? And do they think that someone else got, had greater accomplishments and therefore, but don't say I don't deserve it because of my identity, because if, and I think so one of the things, if somebody comes up to me and says, oh, you were invited to speak because you're a woman, I'll try to say, I don't think that's true. I think I was invited to speak because a lot of people have read my book. Are you aware of other people who were not invited to speak who should have been instead? And then they're like, no, not really. I'm like, so what are we talking about? Yeah.
Right.
But sometimes having a little like sometimes people feel like they're excluded because of who they are, and allowing them, rather than just shutting that down, allowing them to give voice to that and then say, actually, well, let me tell you about the ways I've been excluded because of who I am,
Yeah.
And then you're kind of like on the same side of the table with the person.
Yeah, it's so interesting. This conversation is really stirring a lot in my mind about, I think we can think about prejudice and bias in maybe the more obvious hurtful ways, but there's some other interesting ways it shows up. I don't think she'll mind me sharing this. I have a speaker friend who actually roomed with at this conference. Her name is Fotini Ikonomopoulos. She's Greek. And she was telling me that there was a large conference that happened recently that she was invited to speak at somewhat last minute. It was coming up. And they reached out to her and she said, well, let me do a little bit of due diligence. And every other speaker on the roster for the conference was a white male.
Yeah.
And she said, this feels a bit odd to me. So she wrote back and said, hey, are there any other speakers that aren't white male as part of the conference? And they said, no, it's part of the reason we were excited to get you. And she was like, well, as great as that feels, this actually feels misaligned with my values in this moment. And so it's strange, like bias and prejudice. I don't want to overly simplify and say sometimes, the good kind, right? There is no good kind, but it can be used in ways that to some can be perceived as lucky bonus, but it can still be problematic in ways that we don't expect.
Yeah. I mean, nobody wants to be invited because of their gender or the color of their skin, or disinvited. But either way, that's not why I want. Although I will say there've been a couple of times where somebody has called me last minute in a panic, like, "Oh, we forgot to invite any women."
Right. Yeah.
And I just charge extra and go.
The tax, the woman tax. I love it.
I don't know if that's right, and I feel kind of ashamed admitting that, but that's
If it's
So
not
I
right, I don't. If it's not right, I don't want to be right. I'm fully a fan.
Wesley, what do you think?
Yes, I mean, you could make it up with money. I think that makes it right.
Sure. Yeah.
Also,
That makes
like,
it more right.
yeah, I mean, I also like, I'm kind of I mean, I don't like being invited because I'm a woman, but they sort of have gone to say, we're not inviting you because you're a woman, but
Right.
we are inviting you last minute, and it's obvious, and they just admit it. And somehow to me, just putting it on the table makes it, I'm glad they realized that they needed women. I mean, better
Yeah.
to realize than not to realize.
Yeah.
And I want to help them get more women.
Yeah.
So,
I love that you said that because it's an unwinnable chicken and egg. We need more women
yeah,
on stages. We need more women of color on stages. If
we
that's
need
the way
more
they
men of
get
color,
there,
more
as long
men
as
of
we
color
and
on
more men of
stage.
color and more people of color, more everybody, right? Like
Yes,
that more underrepresented humans on
folks.
stages.
Yes,
And so if that's the way we need to start, as long as again awareness is there, maybe compensation is there. I also don't want to say, well, turn down that opportunity because that perpetuates a problem that still exists. So there's
yes,
nuance, right? It's complex,
yeah,
but
There's actually history around this, though, that during desegregation, the
mhm,
busing and all this stuff, there in workplaces especially, there was like the affirmative action where just because of
right,
someone's race they were getting hired, but studies time and time again have shown that those do make impacts,
yeah,
lasting impacts, beyond, even though it is just a number thing, but just the
right,
interaction, the familiarity for the subsequent waves of people that are
yeah,
able to come afterwards, it does make a difference.
yeah,
So you should not feel bad with accepting the
mhm.
tokenism where it might feel like for appearing, especially if you can get more tokens because of it. Um,
Exactly.
but but
that's a
but it,
that's a great book title. Accept tokenisms for more tokens.
tokens, yes. So life tokens, capitalism.
yeah,
It is really because it can make subsequent like follow on
Right.
inroads into them being more integrated in the future.
yeah.
Sure. I agree.
Well,
It's hard.
such a great conversation. The time has flown. Henna, where can people find you, and where do you want them to buy your books?
Oh, you're very kind. HennaPryor.com is my website. Henna Pryor on all of the socials, LinkedIn. I combine the two.
Instagram. That's good.
LinkedIn, good. That's good. Awkward. LinkedIn is my preferred playground, and Good Awkward, the book, is available everywhere books are sold. If you like indie, I always prefer you buy indie, but Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target.com, everywhere. I am so grateful to be connected with anyone in your community, and really love talking to you both.
Thank you so much. I love Good Awkward. We need more
Thank,
of that in our world. Such a great title.
thank you. Thank you.
Take care,
Thank you so
everyone.
much. Take care. Bye.